Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's Transformation Tuesday. This week, we're going to be talking about one of my golden communication rules. It's called the 24-hour rule, or when do I need to take a break from a conversation rule. What I'm essentially looking at is when I find myself getting emotionally charged in a conversation or noticing that I'm on the defense in some way, I typically need to be able to allow myself the opportunity to slow down, take a break, and come back at a different point to a conversation. For many of us, we've heard the term reaction versus response. But what we don't look at is what does that actually mean when it comes to a conversation? So let's look at and kind of define the two terms, and then we'll talk about how we apply the rule. So first off, reaction. Reactions are what I call the gut-charged responses. They're when we react to a situation or give a response in a situation that comes from that emotional place where we can say, oh, I'm so excited, so I really want to do this, this, and this. Or I'm so pissed off, which makes me want to tell you you're this, this, and this. It's always tied in some way to that emotional state at the time, and that emotional state is typically transient or short-lived. And how I can tell if it's a reaction when I go back later on is, do I still feel the same way about that situation a day or a week or a month after I've had that conversation? My best example is when I think about road rage. So I am terrible, whether I'm driving in the back seat, the front seat, wherever I am, I get pissed as hell when I am driving in a car and somebody cuts us off or is driving too slow or doesn't seem to be paying attention, whatever the case may be. When I get out of the car, though, or the next day, or I suddenly get distracted by a conversation that is pulling me in a different direction, I'm a lot less mean towards those drivers. For example, I know I've flicked people off. I know I've called people probably the worst swear words on the planet, and I couldn't even tell you what their car looks like or what they did anymore. Because again, my reaction in that moment was emotionally charged and tied to this short-lived state of being. A couple other things about reaction that people tend to talk about is that you feel a little like you're losing control of what you're saying, or you said it from this unconscious space. You weren't even aware of what you were saying. It's instant, and most oftentimes you regret it. So when you think about some of these things, my guess is all of you can come up with at least one conversation that you've had with somebody where you've likely fallen into that reaction column. On the flip side, the goal is that we are responding, or we come up with a response, again, instead of that emotionally charged reaction. A response is essentially something that is a little bit more slow to build. You might be able to take in the emotional components, but you think about it from a more balanced state. So I can think about how I'm feeling and what's charged in this conversation, and I can think about the logic. I can think about long-term consequences. I can come up with rationales. And so when I'm responding to somebody, I'm coming from a much more balanced place and less likely to be on the attack or defense or kind of cause my goal to go off course. So why then do we tend to fall into the reaction columns or that category when responding sounds so much better? Well, the short answer is shame. We're going to talk about this tons and tons more. Shame is going to be a topic that comes up week after week. Let me just give you a little tiny blip, though. Shame is essentially any threat to connection or belonging. It's a threat to whatever is going on in our lives and feeling suddenly like things are thrown off and we did something wrong. We're problematic. People aren't going to care about us anymore, or that we have to defend ourselves in some way to make sure we are still adequate to stay tied to whomever we're having this conversation with. So for me, yeah, I definitely get that emotional charge and the reaction when I am face to face with somebody. But the beauty of having a lot of money in debt and a really great education is I've been trained to read those cues in a room. When I'm having a face to face conversation with somebody, yeah, there are definitely times that I want to punch myself in the face or, sometimes the other person, even though I won't do it. But I'm able to kind of come back at it and say, okay, let me think about it this way, or let me find another angle. Again, because my training is in how to read the nonverbals, how to think through some of this stuff. Where I'm not so good is email and text. And I think a lot of times we forget about how much an emotional charge can come from written communication. And so a lot of the times I have to look at what is getting tripped up for me? What's that threat of disconnection for me when I get a text or I get an email from somebody that is somehow pulling on that emotional state? So, looking at this, when I come back to this 24-hour rule of communication, what I'm looking at is when am I finding myself wanting to react? So essentially, when is my shame spiral getting kicked up and where do I need to take a break? So, what I need to look at first is okay, now I know what's the difference between reaction and response. But for me, what does reaction look like? I know that it's very easy for us to think about the anger components, the saying terrible things. It's also the flip side, though. It's the overcompensating. It's saying yes to everything or being overly excited so you overcommit in some way. When you look at it a week later, you go, oh my gosh, why did I do that? So I have to look at, for me, how shame activates me from the texting, the emailing, and sometimes still the verbal communication, where I fall into some sort of a reaction pattern to try to get rid of that feeling of shame. So, what I'd like you to do when you think about this is assess what are all the main types of communication. Again, text, email, letters, Facebook Messenger, in person, over the phone, all those different ways. And then start to do a little bit of an assessment of where do you find yourself getting more emotionally charged and with whom do you find yourself wanting to react more. The next part I look at is okay, if I can start to identify where my shame is getting kicked in, what I need to be able to come back and look at is there were likely warning signs prior to that happening. So the next step is okay, now I've identified where I start reacting. I know that when I'm on the phone, when I'm texting somebody and I feel like I'm not being heard or the way we're communicating is off, I go into a shame spiral. Now, dial it back. What is my body doing to tell me before I react that this is happening? So Brene Brown actually talks a ton about this and understanding your shame warnings and triggers. And for me personally, what I look at is I start to get hot, my chest gets tight, and my heart starts to beat fast. And this is the same whether I become overcommitted, sort of overcompensating, joyful, or when I get angry. And when that starts to happen, this is where the rule gets applied. The final question is, how is it going to serve me to keep having this conversation right now? And if I can't come up with a reason or a rationale why this needs to be solved in this moment, or that if I wait any longer, it's going to be bad, I have to ask myself, what is the harm in taking a break? Or again, what is the benefit from stepping away from the conversation and letting that transient state of emotion die down so my response can be more balanced and factor in all of those other elements of my thinking and my goals and my forward movement, as it were. So, a recap, we either react or respond in any situation, and particularly when there's an emotional charge, we get pulled towards reaction. You have to figure out whether you react or respond in various situations and with whom and in what form of communication you tend to be the most triggered. After that, dial it back and start to look at, okay, so then when those are happening, what do I notice are the physical cues that let me know that I'm starting to fall into a reaction phase? Final state, once you start to learn all of that, you use those cues as your guide to let you know, oh, yellow flag, or sometimes red flag, my armpits are tingling, my chest is tight, my breathing is all fast. So I must be falling into reaction. I'm going to take a break. I'm going to let them know, or sometimes not let them know, that I need some time to recollect where I want to be and give them a response that I know I'm going to be okay with more long term. As always, let me know if you need any help with implementing this into your daily lives, what more information you want on the 24-hour rule or about reacting and responding. And if you have any successes, challenges, hardships, questions, please comment below and let me know if I can help you in any way. Otherwise, I will see you next week for our next Transformation Tuesday.